Hey, we're here with Megan Cannon. Megan is a former college soccer player that I've been fortunate to know for quite a few years now. Megan, tell us about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I recently opened my own private practice. It's called Megan Cannon Counseling, where I will be seeing teenagers and adults, hopefully trying to be working in the athletic community, working with student athletes, former athletes, those who work in sport, really just anyone who identifies with like that athlete inside of them.
Sure.
And that comes from obviously having, a long, many years of being an athlete myself. And as you said, I played soccer in college at Western Carolina University, but growing up I played basketball and soccer, and it's a very different world now than it was back then. But I am, at the place now where I'm seeing a lot of just like a need to support the mental wellness of our athletes, because a lot of them are struggling. And I've also been a school counselor for the last 12 years and local schools within the Low Country, and I know as kids as a whole are struggling, and particularly athletes just have a really unique need set because of just how they spend their time and just the pressures that are put on them.
Sure. One of the big changes I think that we see in sports now compared to when we were playing is the amount of pressure that's on kids and amateur athletes from the youth ages all the way through high school. What are some important things for people to understand, whether it's the athlete themselves, the parents, in regards to that current situation?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a fine line of putting everything into it and giving it their all, but also making it their identity, because we know that at one point that will not be their identity. Like there will
Sure.
no longer be a baseball player, a softball player, a soccer player. And so when you're thinking of these kids as they're growing up, like we can't just focus on who they are within the sport. We have to be able to cultivate just more of a holistic version of themselves, so that when that time comes and they have to move on to do something else, that they're not just left thinking, oh, now what? Who am I that I'm not Megan the soccer player, Randy the baseball player? And that can be really difficult. And with kids starting so young with travel ball and just the intensity of year-long sport, it almost like it is taken, maybe when we grew up, like those last 4 or 5 years that was like super intense. It's like you're talking like 10 years probably, because the intensity is so much greater for students and athletes these days.
Sure. And you mentioned, as athletes are no longer on the field one day, because, for all of us, our career ends at some point, and you work with former athletes. What are some things that are important from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think that when you stop playing, whether it be, in high school, finishing high school, in college, or if you go professionally, whenever that time does end for you, you can struggle, be like, what's next for me? And if you are someone who is older, that might look like a career change. It could look like trying to, all of a sudden develop skills that you haven't been able to develop because you were playing your sport year round. Like you weren't able to work or do internships, and now you're left thinking, now what do I want to do with my life? And there's a lot of loss in that. There's almost like a grief that comes with, ending your sport.
Sure.
And I think that's why so many of us want to stay in sport and try to find something that can kind of give us that same feel. And that's definitely my story. When I finished playing college soccer, I moved to Charleston, and I started working at the Citadel, which is where we met, and I worked in the athletic department, and just trying to figure out something just to stay in it.
Sure.
Because when you put your heart and soul in something for so long and it ends, like you don't want it to end. So you want to try to find something else. And after years of working in sports between the Citadel and then I worked for the River Dogs, I finally found my passion for counseling and went to school to get that degree. But I remember very vividly just like the mourning process almost that you had to go through. And if you don't have the support to kind of get through that, a lot of people can get really lost.
Sure. What are some recommendations you have for athletes that are, searching for something to fill that void that their sport has left?
Yeah, I think you can still use all the good things that the sport gave you. I mean, that's always something that you want to kind of market yourself, especially if you're trying to get into like a different career. You know, I always say employers love athletes because what it shows them is that you know how to, you've dedicated, you know about hard work, you know about time management, you know about, you know, how to fail, hopefully, which we can talk about that in a second. But there's so many good qualities that come from being an athlete that you learn that can transfer into the workforce, but also just knowing that what is it that you like to do for fun, you know,
Sure.
and how do you want to take care of yourself from not just like a physical standpoint, but a mental standpoint. You know, mental wellness is really, you know, multifaceted to where, you know, you're looking at your physical health should be something that you're really looking into, because when you are an athlete and for maybe many years someone's told you what to do to work out, well, when it's over, you have to figure out what it is that you enjoy, and that can be really hard. So maybe trying to plug into a community of people who are kind of like-minded, you know, a gym that maybe has other athletes in there that you can kind of like get that competition in, is always good.
Sure.
Really focusing in on also like nutrition, like what you're putting into your body is equally as important. And so if you've never thought about nutrition, you know, there's plenty of support out there, just like what is it that is going to make me feel good. And you know, at the end of the day, it's not brain surgery, it's, you know, fruits, vegetables, you know, green, you know, more green, less beige. And you know, that kind of fills your cup. Also thinking about just you know, connecting with other people who have been in a similar position, and there's a lot, and I think there's a lot of freedom in talking about the feeling of that. I don't think that that's very common, but even if it's just amongst your like core group of maybe your classmates or people that you went with, just being like, hey, you know, I like really miss playing. Like, what do you think? And you get to create that dialogue to be like, I'm not alone in this. Like, we're, you know, thousands and thousands of people are experiencing this exact thought, and I'm not alone, and I can be actively doing things to get myself into a place where I can look back and think, hey, that was such a great experience, as opposed to just thinking, oh my gosh, my life is over, what am I going to do now that it's over?
Sure. And you know, and two things you mentioned, that, you know, kind of getting back to current athletes. One, you mentioned the ability to handle failure, which I think is something that a lot of people struggle with in general, especially athletes. And then the other being, and it kind of to the same point, the life lessons that we can take from athletics moving on. As far as those things, kind of take those a little further.
Yeah, the failure thing is just so important, and I'm a mom, and it is really difficult, I know, to like watch your child fail or know it's going to happen, and it's almost like you have to like develop that muscle to be like, this is okay, like they are going to be better for it. I cannot do everything for them in life, and you know, you get to look back at your life and be like, I failed all the time, and how did I make that through? You didn't make it through by someone putting a Band-Aid on every little problem potentially. And so I think parents these days need to just know, you know, it's okay. Like kids are resilient, and as long as you're being loving and supporting and encouraging, like they're gonna make it through.
Sure.
And you know, in many sports, you're failing a lot more than you're succeeding. Like
Sure.
baseball particularly, like that's a sport that you know, if you're however many bats up, I wouldn't know the statistic, but like you're not hitting a home run every time. So if you look at every at bat, if you didn't hit a home run as a failure, well, that's going to make for a really hard and long season, and you're going to start to really create a lot of self-doubt within yourself. And so I think what parents can do and coaches can do is really just, you know, acknowledge the failure, and you know, if there's a teaching moment available, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's going to happen.
Sure.
How do we move forward from that in a healthy way so that the student athlete doesn't start to just like second guess everything about what they're doing, and then it turns into, you know, other mind games, and you know, can also affect their self-esteem and potentially create, you know, bigger issues like anxiety, or you know, even turn into some depression.
Sure. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make nowadays, especially when athletes are young, is trying to hide them from that failure. You know, remove the obstacles out of their way. Like you said, kids are resilient, and learning to deal with failure is a learned skill. And I think a lot of times we protect them from that for so long that it's inevitably going to start to happen at some point. The game's tough, life's tough. You know, it's an important skill for them to, you know, expose them to, you know, quote unquote failure early on. Allow them to learn how to handle it, and like you say, kids are resilient.
Yeah, I mean, it's a life skill. You know, our job as their parents and their coaches are to teaching new things. They don't come out of the womb knowing how to do this. Like, we taught them, we help teach them how to read. We help teach them, you know, all these things. Well, teaching failure, that should be right in line, because that is, you know, equally as important as a lot of the other skills that we focus on teaching our kids.
Sure. Anything else that I'll kind of cut there, but anything else that you think we should touch on? If not, like, I'll do like a thank you in a little bit.
Maybe, I guess, just like I could go into like how I could support like the mental health of like what you could, maybe signs
Okay.
of like, okay, if, you know, so I just mentioned about how it could lead to like, you know, anxiety or depression. Maybe that could be a good segue into say, you know, like you just mentioned, you know, some of the, you know, mental health issues, you know, what
What are
have
some
you
signs
seen?
to
Yeah, or
look
what's some
at?
signs you could look for?
I'll do that, and then I can do like, you know, if people would are looking to, you know, if they think of how to say it. I want to set it up so like you can, if people are trying to get in touch with you, you can kind of give them some of that
Okay.
info and stuff like that
Great.
too. So, yeah.
Doing great. That's great.
I'm so bad at this
No,
stuff.
you're not.
Like,
It's
when I
great.
see people do these things, I'm like, God, man, they're so freaking good.
No, you
Like,
did. It's been great.
You mentioned obviously the mental health side and things that people struggle with, athletes, former athletes. What are some of the signs that you've seen that that you know we should look for when we start again? Hold on.
Yeah, that was good. I mean,
Yeah.
I was like teed me up. I was just ready to.
So you mentioned, you know, obviously we talked about the mental health side of things. What are some of the signs that you've seen that we could look for that tell us we might want to speak to someone for some help?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that, because I think that a lot of people don't recognize it, or maybe you don't want to think something is wrong. You know, on the surface everything looks great, but you know, oftentimes it could be a mess inside. So I would say some signs to just look out for would be, you know, just change in behavior potentially, maybe just different like outbursts that haven't normally been there. You know, we have to take into account teenage hormones, so it's confusing to know like what is just hormonal and what is maybe something bigger going on. So, you know, just kind of like taking inventory of that. Also, you know, have eating habits changed, particularly with girls? You know, that's something to really be cautious of. Like if you notice kind of like a dip in kind of food intake, or changing the behavioral around food is really important to think about too. I would also say that if maybe sleeping, if they're sleeping a lot more than they have previously, you know, a lot of this is just patterns. Like if a kid sleeps until noon and they do that every time that they can't, like that probably doesn't mean anything's wrong. But if it's consistent and it's happening over, you know, a longer period of time, then like there could definitely be something bigger going on. I think maybe one of the most important things would be to like have that communication with your kid. You know, I mean, they may not know what they're feeling is different. They may just feel like they need to keep it all in because they need to perform. And kids these days have a ton of pressure to perform on the field, in the classroom. Like they've got a lot of people looking at them to be something. And if they're not fitting that mold, then it can be kind of get into dangerous territory. So be that support for your kid, and be that person that they can lean on and be honest with. And if that hasn't been the relationship up to this point, you can change that at any point. Like you can create that and say, hey, you know, I know that this season of life, it's like, it's really intense for you. Like I want to be a support. Like you can tell me anything. And then just ask specific questions that are open-ended. So, if you ask a closed question, you're gonna get a yes or a no. You gotta create that opportunity to like get them to talk. I know a lot of times it's like, my kid's not gonna talk to me. Get them in the car if they're not driving. Get them side by side where you're not staying. Go walk the dog together. If you have a driver, schedule a breakfast. Like schedule something to where you just get a little bit of one-on time and really just get to like what's their heart, like what is going on, like do they love it still?
Sure.
Have you asked that lately? Like, have you asked, do you love what you're doing? Because if you don't love it, like let's talk about that. I mean, is that still something you're really putting in a lot of time and effort? What are you thinking about all that? And taking the pressure off of them and really trying to not think of like, this is what I think is best for them, and really let them direct their life at this point, because it does not end well generally if that pressure of the parent or the coach, and if the kid is just like, I'm really not into this anymore. So again, that can also lead into bigger struggles down the line.
Sure. Now, if a parent or an athlete would like to get in touch with you, would like to chat with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. It's megancannoncounseling.com, and you can just fill out a form. And what my approach is to really just work with the person holistically. Like, let's talk about like where you are now and like where do you want to be, and maybe it's goal setting. Maybe we really do need to dig into some like issues with anxiety or depression, and so maybe it's just someone like, hey, I need someone else to talk to other than my parent that is going to understand where I'm coming from. I've been working with kids and students a lot in the Low Country for over 12 years in this, so I know how much they desire to have someone to talk to, and so I am available. I'd love to work with them, and as well as any adults who may have identified as an athlete and struggle with where they are in their life, and whether it be like a new career or maybe they work in sports and like they're coaching. Like, this is just a lot of pressure, and the world of athletics is so wonderful and you get so much out of it. There's so much joy, but there also can be a lot of heartbreak, and I never want anyone to feel like they have to go at it alone.
Sure. Well, Megan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.